Marcus Chen stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of his modest Seattle home. His dark hair was messy, and his tired eyes showed the weight of the decision he had made. At 35 years old, he was about to walk away from his marriage of 5 years to Sarah Thompson. The morning had started like any other. Sarah had made breakfast, humming softly in the kitchen as she always did. The smell of coffee and toast filled their small but cozy house, but today was different. The packed suitcase hidden in Marcus's car made sure of that. As he walked into the kitchen, Sarah smiled at him. She was wearing the blue apron he had given her last Christmas, her honey-brown hair tied in a messy bun. "I made your favorite omelette," she said, sliding the plate across their small kitchen island. Marcus felt his stomach twist with guilt. "We need to talk," he said, the words coming out harder than he expected. Sarah's smile faded slowly as she looked at him. She had always been good at reading his moods. "What's wrong?" she asked, turning off the stove and wiping her hands on her apron. Marcus took a deep breath. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. This life, it's not what I want." His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking under the table. Sarah sat down across from him, her breakfast forgotten. "What do you mean?" Her voice was quiet, but her eyes were already filling with tears. "I'm leaving," Marcus said. "My company is growing. There are investors interested in taking us to the next level. But every time I try to move forward, you talk about staying small, about being content with what we have." "Because there's more to life than just making money, Marcus," Sarah replied, her voice cracking. "We talked about building a life together, remember? A family, a home, making a difference in our community." Marcus stood up, pacing the kitchen they had painted together 2 summers ago. "That's exactly what I mean. While you're thinking about community gardens and local art programs, I'm trying to build something big, something that could change the world." "And you think I'm holding you back?" Sarah asked, standing up too. Her hands were gripping the kitchen counter so hard her knuckles turned white. "You don't understand my vision," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Last week, when I talked about moving to Silicon Valley for better opportunities, you started talking about your students here and your volunteer work at the community center." Sarah moved closer to him, reaching for his hand. "Because those things matter too, Marcus. We don't need millions to be happy. Remember when we first got married? We lived in that tiny apartment, ate ramen noodles, and we were happy." Marcus pulled his hand away. "That's not enough anymore. I need more. I want more." "More than me?" Sarah's question hung in the air between them. Marcus looked at their wedding photo on the wall. They were so young then, so full of dreams. But somewhere along the way, their dreams had taken different paths. "I've already packed my things," he said finally. Sarah's sob broke the silence. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "We can work this out. We can find a balance." But Marcus had made up his mind. He walked to the door, grabbed his coat, and picked up his briefcase. "The divorce papers will be sent to you next week," he said, not looking at her. He couldn't bear to see her cry. "Marcus," Sarah called out as he opened the door. He paused but didn't turn around. "You're making a mistake. Success means nothing if you're alone." The morning air was cool on his face as he walked to his car. He could hear Sarah crying through the open window, and for a moment, his hand hesitated on the car door. But then he thought about the investors waiting for his call, about the future he could build, about the success that was just within his reach. As he drove away, Marcus looked in his rearview mirror. Sarah stood in the doorway, still wearing her blue apron, watching him leave. He told himself this was the right decision, that sometimes you had to sacrifice everything to achieve your dreams. But as their house disappeared from view, a small voice in his head whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was leaving behind something more valuable than all the millions he hoped to make. 3 years passed like a blur for Marcus Chen. His small tech company, which started in a rented office with just 5 employees, had grown into something he had only dreamed of. Now, sitting in his glass-walled office on the 20th floor of a Seattle high-rise, he looked down at the city below. "Mr. Chen, your 2 o'clock meeting is here," his assistant Jessica announced through the intercom. Marcus straightened his expensive tie, a far cry from the cheap ones he used to wear when Sarah would help him get ready for work each morning. He pushed the thought away quickly. The meeting went well, like most things did these days. Another successful deal, another step closer to becoming one of the biggest names in tech. When everyone left his office, Marcus sat back in his leather chair and looked at his phone. 3 missed calls from his mother. Marcus, his mother's worried voice came through when he called back. You missed Sunday dinner again. I'm sorry, Mom. The company is keeping me busy, he said, rubbing his tired eyes. It was already dark outside. Another day spent entirely in the office. I saw Sarah last week at the grocery store, his mother said carefully. Marcus's hand tightened around the phone. She asked about you. She's doing well, teaching art to children now. Mom, please. Marcus cut her off. I don't want to know. After hanging up, Marcus walked to his private bar and poured himself a drink. His reflection in the window showed a different man than the one who had left his wife 3 years ago. His suits were tailored now, his watch cost more than his first car, and his hair was perfectly styled. But the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. The next morning, Marcus had breakfast at an expensive restaurant with James, one of his investors. The company's growth is incredible, James said, looking at the latest reports. You're going to be a very rich man, Marcus, even richer than you are now. Marcus nodded, pushing his untouched food around his plate. Success had brought him everything he thought he wanted. His company now employed over 300 people. Tech magazines wrote articles about him. Young entrepreneurs asked him to be their mentor. But his huge penthouse apartment felt empty every night. The expensive restaurants he ate at couldn't match the simple meals Sarah used to cook. The women he dated, models, businesswomen, socialites, never stayed around for long. They were attracted to his success, his money, but none of them ever asked about his dreams the way Sarah used to. One evening, while looking through old emails for a business contract, Marcus found a folder he had forgotten about. Sarah's recipes, it was labeled. His finger hovered over the delete button, but he couldn't press it. Instead, he opened it and found dozens of emails where Sarah had sent him recipes to try, each one with a little note of encouragement about his work. Made this soup when you were sick last winter, one note read. You said it helped you feel better enough to finish your first business proposal. Marcus closed his laptop quickly, his heart beating fast. The next day, during a board meeting, someone mentioned expanding into children's educational software. We could partner with local schools, the board member suggested. There's this amazing art program in the city that's getting a lot of attention. Marcus's assistant passed him the proposal. His coffee cup nearly fell when he saw the program director's name, Sarah Thompson. The photos showed children painting and learning on tablets, their faces bright with excitement. In one picture, Sarah was teaching a young girl how to hold a paintbrush. She was smiling, looking exactly like she used to when she talked about making a difference in their community. Mr. Chen, should we look into this partnership? Someone asked. Marcus closed the file quickly. No, he said firmly. We'll look at other options. That night, alone in his penthouse, Marcus walked from room to room. The space was perfectly decorated by an expensive interior designer, but it had none of the warmth of the small house he had shared with Sarah. His phone buzzed with messages about meetings, deals, and business dinners. He had everything he had left her for: money, success, freedom. But as he stood looking out at the city lights, he realized that success felt different than he had imagined. It felt colder, emptier, and somehow incomplete. The day Marcus Chen's company went public on the stock market, his net worth jumped to over $200 million. The celebration party was held at the most expensive hotel in Seattle, with hundreds of guests raising their champagne glasses to his success. To Marcus Chen, the man who turned a small startup into a tech empire, James, his main investor, announced to the crowd. Everyone cheered, and camera flashes lit up the room. Marcus smiled for the photos, shook hands, and said all the right things. But his eyes kept drifting to an empty corner of the room where a small table sat unused. Years ago, at his wedding reception, that's where he and Sarah had sat, laughing and sharing their dreams. The memory hit him unexpectedly, like a punch to the stomach. Marcus, darling, a voice called out. Lisa, a model he had been dating for the past 3 months, wrapped her arms around him. She wore an expensive designer dress and diamonds that he had given her last week. The reporters want more pictures of us together. Later that night, after everyone had left and Lisa had gone home to her own apartment, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse. He opened his laptop and did something he hadn't done in years. He searched for Sarah's name online. The screen filled with articles about her work. Local art teacher transforms community education, one headline read. Another showed Sarah standing in front of a colorful mural, surrounded by smiling children. She had cut her hair shorter, and her eyes sparkled with happiness in every photo. Marcus closed the laptop quickly and walked to his bedroom. The walls were covered with expensive art pieces, chosen by his interior designer. But none of them had the heart of the simple paintings Sarah used to make, the ones he had called too basic before he left. The next morning, during a meeting with his company's board members, Marcus couldn't focus. The numbers on the screen showed incredible profits, but his mind kept wandering to the article about Sarah's art program. "Mr. Chen," his assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Your real estate agent called. The mansion you were interested in is available." Marcus nodded, remembering the 12-bedroom house he had viewed last week. It had everything: a swimming pool, tennis courts, a private cinema. But something stopped him from saying yes. Maybe it was the memory of Sarah laughing in their small kitchen, saying, "Who needs a big house? All we need is enough space to fill with love." That evening, Lisa called to break up with him. "You're just not there," she said. "Even when we're together, you're somewhere else." Marcus didn't argue. She was right. Alone again, Marcus walked through his penthouse, past the expensive furniture and modern art. He stopped at a drawer he rarely opened and pulled out an old photo album. Inside was a picture from his first office, when his company was just starting. Sarah had taken it. He was sitting at a second-hand desk, looking tired but happy. Sarah's note on the back read, "To my hard-working husband, your dreams are big, but your heart is bigger. Never forget that." The next day, Marcus drove past their old neighborhood. The small house where they had lived was now painted a different color, and a new family lived there. Through the window, you could see children playing in what used to be their living room. He remembered the night he left, how Sarah had said success means nothing if you're alone. Back then, he thought she didn't understand ambition. Now, with more money than he could spend in a lifetime, he realized maybe he was the one who hadn't understood what real success meant. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. "Forbes magazine wants to do a cover story. They're calling you the tech world's most eligible bachelor." Marcus put the phone away without replying. In his mind, he could hear Sarah's voice from years ago. "What good is being on magazine covers if no one at home is proud of you?" At night, lying in his king-size bed, Marcus looked at the city lights through his floor-to-ceiling windows. He had everything he had dreamed of: money, power, freedom. People called him a success story. But as he drifted off to sleep, he wondered why success felt so much like failure. Marcus Chen sat in his favorite coffee shop, the one place in Seattle where people didn't immediately recognize him. Here, dressed in casual clothes instead of his usual expensive suits, he could almost feel normal again. The smell of coffee reminded him of morning breakfasts with Sarah, but after 8 years, the memory didn't hurt as much as it used to. "Marcus?" "Marcus Chen." A familiar voice called out. He looked up to see David Walker, an old friend from his early business days. Before Marcus could make an excuse to leave, David had already sat down at his table. "It's been years," David said, smiling warmly. "I heard about your company's success. Congratulations." Marcus nodded politely, stirring his untouched coffee. He hadn't talked to David since before the divorce. David had been one of their closest friends, always coming over for Sarah's Sunday dinners. "How's the family?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the conversation away from the past. David's eyes lit up. "Great. The kids are in high school now. Actually, my daughter is taking art classes at Sarah's community center." Marcus's hand froze on his coffee cup. "Sarah's community center?" "Oh, you haven't heard." David leaned forward. "Sarah's doing amazing things. She started with one small art program, and now she has centers all over the city. She even wrote a series of children's books about art that got really popular." Marcus tried to keep his face neutral, but his heart was racing. "Books?" "Yeah, they're beautiful. She writes and illustrates them herself. The main character is this little girl who sees art in everything around her." David pulled out his phone. "Here, my daughter loves them." The phone showed a colorful book cover. "The World Through Amy's Eyes" by Sarah Thompson. The illustration showed a young girl looking at the world through a rainbow-colored lens. It was exactly the kind of thing Sarah used to talk about creating, back when Marcus thought her dreams were too small. "She's really made something special," David continued, not noticing how tightly Marcus was gripping his coffee cup. The centers offer free art classes to kids who can't afford them. Last month, one of her students won a national art competition. Marcus remembered how Sarah used to talk about teaching art to children, how her eyes would light up when she described helping them discover their creativity. He had dismissed those dreams, telling her to think bigger. That's good to hear, Marcus managed to say. You know what's funny? David said, finishing his coffee. Remember how you always said Sarah needed to think bigger? Turns out her way of thinking big was different from yours. While you were building your tech empire, she was building something too, just in her own way. After David left, Marcus sat alone for a long time. He pulled out his phone and searched for Sarah's books. There were 5 of them now, all bestsellers in children's literature. The reviews were filled with parents thanking her for inspiring their children. He found an interview she had done with a local newspaper. The photo showed her sitting in a bright art studio, surrounded by children's paintings. She looked different, more confident, more at peace. Her hair was shorter now, with a few strands of gray that somehow made her look even more beautiful. My goal was never to get rich, she was quoted saying. I wanted to make a difference, to show children that art can change how they see the world. Sometimes the biggest dreams aren't about making money, they're about making meaning. Marcus walked back to his office building, but instead of going inside, he kept walking. Her words echoed in his mind. Making meaning. Isn't that what she had tried to tell them all those years ago? His phone buzzed with messages about meetings and deals, but for the first time in years, the business empire he had built felt small compared to what Sarah had created. He had made millions of dollars, but she had made thousands of children's lives better. That night, Marcus ordered all of Sarah's books. When they arrived, he stayed up late reading them. In each story, he could hear her voice, see her heart. The last page of each book had the same message, to all the dreamers who know that the biggest adventures happen in the heart. Sitting in his empty penthouse, surrounded by her books, Marcus finally understood what real success looked like. And for the first time in 8 years, he let himself feel the full weight of what he had lost. Marcus Chen walked through JFK Airport in New York, pulling his expensive leather suitcase. His flight had been delayed for 3 hours, and he was stuck here during his layover. At 44 years old, he had flown so many times that airports felt more familiar than his own home. Would you like another coffee, sir? A young barista asked at the airport cafe. Marcus nodded, taking a seat by the large windows where planes took off into the cloudy March sky. He had just finished a big business meeting in New York, where his company had signed another $1 million deal. As he sipped his coffee, a laugh caught his attention. It was a familiar sound, one that had lived in his memories for 9 years. His heart stopped for a moment. Across the terminal, standing near gate B7, was Sarah. She looked different, yet exactly the same. Her honey-brown hair was shorter now, with gentle waves framing her face. She wore a bright yellow sweater. She had always loved cheerful colors. But what struck Marcus most was how she glowed with happiness. Next to her stood a tall man with kind eyes and gray temples. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a blue sweater, and he was showing Sarah something on his phone that made her laugh again. The man's other hand rested gently on her lower back, a gesture so natural it made Marcus's chest tighten. That's going to make the kids so happy, Sarah was saying, her voice carrying across the terminal. I can't wait to tell them about the new art supplies. The man smiled at her with such warmth that Marcus had to look away. When he looked back, he noticed something else. A simple gold wedding ring on Sarah's finger, matched by one on the man's hand. Marcus watched as they sat down at the gate. The man pulled out a sandwich from his bag and split it in half, giving the bigger piece to Sarah. It was such a simple act of caring, but it reminded Marcus of how he and Sarah used to share meals in their early days. Flight 507 to Seattle is now boarding, the announcement echoed through the terminal. Marcus realized it was his flight, the same one Sarah and the man were waiting for. Sarah pulled out one of her children's books from her bag. Marcus recognized the colorful cover. She started making notes in the margins, probably new ideas for her next story. The man beside her was reading what looked like student papers, occasionally showing her something that made them both smile. A young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, suddenly approached their seats. Are you Miss Thompson? She asked Sarah shyly. The one who writes the Emmy books? Sarah's face lit up. Yes, I am. Do you like to draw like Amy does? The girl nodded eagerly. I want to be an artist because of your books. My mom says you teach art too. That's right, Sarah said warmly. I have art centers where children can come and create whatever they imagine. She reached into her bag and pulled out a fresh copy of her book, signing it for the delighted girl. The man watched this interaction with obvious pride. When the girl left, he kissed Sarah's temple softly and whispered something that made her smile. It was the kind of gentle love that comes from deep understanding and respect. Marcus remembered how Sarah used to talk about wanting to inspire children through art. Back then, he had called it a small dream. Now, watching her impact lives one child at a time, he realized there was nothing small about it at all. Final boarding call for Flight 507 to Seattle. The announcement came again. As Sarah and the man gathered their things, Marcus noticed how they moved in perfect sync, helping each other with their bags, making sure they hadn't forgotten anything. They looked like two people who had built a life of shared purpose and joy. Marcus stayed frozen in his seat, his coughing out cold. His flight was boarding, but he couldn't move. After 9 years of building his empire, he had finally found Sarah again. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had found someone who understood what he hadn't. That true success wasn't about the size of your dreams, but about who you chose to share them with. The happy couple walked toward the boarding gate, and Marcus watched as the man gently placed his hand on Sarah's back, guiding her through the crowd. In that simple gesture, Marcus saw everything he had walked away from 9 years ago: love, understanding, and a different kind of wealth that no amount of money could buy. Marcus Chen's feet moved before his brain could stop them. He found himself walking toward Gate B7, where Sarah and the man were showing their boarding passes. His heart pounded with each step. Sarah? His voice came out softer than he intended. Sarah turned around, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Her eyes widened in recognition, but instead of the pain he remembered from their last meeting, her face showed only mild surprise. Marcus, she said calmly. The man beside her turned, looking between them with curiosity. I didn't expect to see you here. Marcus struggled to find the right words. The rehearsed speeches he had imagined over the years all disappeared. I saw you from the cafe, he managed to say. Sarah nodded, then turned to the man beside her. Michael, this is Marcus Chen. She paused for a moment before adding, my former husband. Michael's eyebrows raised slightly, but his friendly smile didn't fade. He extended his hand. Michael Peterson, nice to meet you. Marcus shook his hand, noticing how firm and genuine Michael's handshake was. You're a teacher, right? Marcus asked, remembering the papers Michael had been grading. Elementary school principal, Michael corrected kindly. That's actually how Sarah and I met. Her art program at our school changed everything for our students. Sarah smiled at Michael with such warmth that Marcus had to look away. Michael gave me space for my first art center, she explained. He believed in the project when most other schools said no. The children's test scores improved, their attendance got better, and their creativity just exploded, Michael added, looking at Sarah with pride. It was impossible not to believe in her vision. Marcus felt a sharp pain in his chest. Vision. Wasn't that what he had accused Sarah of lacking? I saw your books, Marcus said to Sarah. They're amazing. David Walker told me about them. Thank you, Sarah replied. Her voice was polite but distant, so different from the emotional way she used to speak to him. The 5th one just came out last month. An awkward silence fell between them. Michael, sensing the tension, gently touched Sarah's shoulder. I'll get us some water for the flight, honey. He smiled at Marcus before walking away, giving them a moment alone. He seems like a good man, Marcus said quietly. He is, Sarah agreed. We've been married for 3 years now. He understands that success isn't just about money or power. It's about making a difference in people's lives. Her words hit Marcus hard. He looked at her closely, at the confidence in her posture, the peace in her eyes, the slight gray in her hair that she didn't try to hide. This wasn't the same Sarah who had begged him to stay 9 years ago. I was wrong, Marcus said suddenly. About your dreams being too small. About everything. Sarah's expression softened slightly. No, Marcus. You weren't wrong about your dreams. You were wrong about mine. You thought success could only look one way, your way. Michael showed me that my dreams weren't small. They were just different. Michael returned with water bottles, wrapping an arm naturally around Sarah's waist. "They're starting to board our section," he said. Sarah nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "I hope you found what you were looking for, Marcus." As they turned to leave, Marcus noticed something he had missed before. Sarah was wearing a simple silver necklace with a small paintbrush charm. He remembered Michael showing her something similar on his phone earlier. It was probably a gift from him, the kind of thoughtful present that showed he really knew her. "Actually," Sarah said, pausing before they walked away, "I should thank you, Marcus. If you hadn't left, I might never have found the courage to build my own dream, and I might never have met Michael." With that, she and Michael walked toward the boarding gate, their hands linked together. Marcus watched as Michael whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, that same laugh that had caught his attention earlier, but now it belonged to someone else. Standing alone at the gate, Marcus realized that sometimes the biggest success stories aren't the ones that make headlines or earn millions. Sometimes they're written in children's smiles, painted in community art centers, and lived in the quiet love between two people who truly see each other. Marcus Chen sat in his first-class seat, staring out the airplane window. Even though Sarah and Michael were somewhere in economy class on the same flight, they felt worlds away. His mind kept replaying their conversation at the gate, finding new meaning in every word. The flight attendant offered him champagne, but he asked for water instead. For the first time in years, he didn't want to blur his thoughts. He needed to feel everything, to understand what had just happened. As the plane took off, Marcus opened his laptop and found himself looking at old emails. There was one from 9 years ago, just a week before he left. Sarah had written about her dream of teaching art to children. "Imagine a place where every child feels special," she had written. "Where they learn that their creativity matters. It's not about making money, Marcus. It's about making lives better." Back then, he had dismissed her email with a short reply, "Sounds nice, but we need to think bigger." Now, at 44 years old, sitting alone in his expensive seat, Marcus finally understood what Sarah had meant about thinking bigger. Her dream hadn't been about building the biggest art center or making the most money. It had been about touching the most lives, creating the most meaning. He pulled out his phone and searched for news about Sarah's art centers. The results amazed him. Over 5,000 children had gone through her programs. Dozens had won national awards. But more importantly, hundreds of parents had written about how her centers had changed their children's lives. "My daughter was so shy before," one mother wrote. "Now she expresses herself through art. Mrs. Peterson gave her that gift." Mrs. Peterson, Sarah Peterson now, not Thompson. The name change hit him harder than he expected. Marcus remembered watching Michael with Sarah at the airport. The way Michael had split his sandwich with her, how he carried her heavy bag, how he stepped back to let her talk to that young fan. Small gestures, but each one showed something Marcus had failed to give Sarah, respect for who she truly was. The plane hit some turbulence, but Marcus barely noticed. He was lost in memories, seeing them differently now. All those times Sarah had supported his dreams, attended his business meetings, listened to his plans. She had never tried to stop him from thinking big. She had just wanted him to see that there were different ways to make an impact. Michael had seen it. He had given Sarah's first art center a home in his school, believing in her vision when it was just an idea. He had understood what Marcus couldn't, that sometimes the biggest dreams don't look big at all from the outside. "Would you like to see our dinner menu, Mr. Chen?" the flight attendant asked. Marcus shook his head. His appetite was gone. Instead, he pulled out his tablet and started reading articles about successful community art programs. With each story, he saw more clearly how wrong he had been. Sarah hadn't needed his money to make her dreams come true. She hadn't needed his connections or his business sense. She had needed someone who believed that her way of changing the world was just as valuable as his. Looking at his own reflection in the darkened plane window, Marcus saw himself clearly for the first time in years. Yes, he had built a tech empire worth hundreds of millions. His face had been on magazine covers. Business schools taught about his success. But Sarah had built something different. Her art centers were changing lives one child at a time. Her books were inspiring a new generation to see beauty in the world. And most importantly, she had found someone who understood that success wasn't just about the size of your bank account. It was about the size of your impact. The plane's engines hummed steadily as night fell outside. Somewhere behind him, Sarah was probably sharing another half sandwich with Michael, maybe showing him new ideas for her next book or planning their next art center. They were building something beautiful together, one small dream at a time. Marcus closed his laptop and leaned back in his seat. 9 years ago, he had left Sarah because he thought she would hold him back from success. Now he realized that he had been the one who hadn't understood what true success looked like. 1 month after the airport encounter, Marcus Chen stood in front of a rundown building in downtown Seattle. The real estate agent beside him looked confused. "Mr. Chen, are you sure about this property?" she asked. "With your budget, we could look at premium office spaces in better areas." Marcus smiled, remembering Sarah's words about making a difference. "This is perfect," he said, looking at the old community center. "It just needs some love." That evening, sitting in his penthouse, Marcus wrote an email he had been thinking about for weeks. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard before he began typing. "Dear Sarah and Michael, I'm writing to make a donation to your art centers. But more than that, I want to offer this building I just bought as a new location for your program. The neighborhood needs it. No strings attached, just a gift from someone who finally understands what thinking big really means." 3 days later, Michael replied, "Dear Marcus, Sarah and I have discussed your generous offer. We'd be happy to look at the space. The children in that area could really benefit from an art center." The meeting was set for the following week. Marcus watched from his car as Sarah and Michael arrived at the building. Sarah wore her usual bright colors, a pink sweater this time, and Michael carried a notebook, probably full of ideas already. "The structure is solid," Marcus explained as they walked through the empty rooms. "It just needs renovation." Sarah walked to the large windows, sunlight streaming through the dust. "Look at all this natural light, Michael," she said excitedly. "Perfect for the painting classes." Michael nodded, taking notes. "We could fit twice as many students here as in our other centers," he said, smiling at his wife's enthusiasm. Marcus stayed quiet, watching them plan and dream together. Michael asked Sarah's opinion about everything, writing down each of her ideas. This was how it should have been, Marcus realized. Two people building something meaningful together. "Why are you doing this, Marcus?" Sarah asked finally, her voice gentle but direct. Marcus looked around the empty room. "Because success feels different now," he said honestly. "Meeting you both at the airport, it made me realize some things. I want to use what I've built to help others build too." Michael put his arm around Sarah, and she leaned into him naturally. "That's a good way to think big," Michael said kindly. Over the next 6 months, Marcus threw himself into the renovation project. He hired the best contractors but let Sarah and Michael make all the decisions about the space. His tech company still ran successfully, but for the first time, it wasn't the only thing in his life. On opening day, Marcus stood at the back of the crowd as Sarah and Michael cut the ribbon. The building had been transformed. Bright murals covered the walls, and children's artwork hung in every window. The sign above the door read, "Thompson Peterson Community Art Center." "And a special thank you to our donor, who wished to remain anonymous," Sarah said in her speech, though her eyes met Marcus's briefly. "This center proves that when we all work together, dreams can grow bigger than we ever imagined." Later that evening, after the crowds had left, Marcus walked through the quiet center. Children's laughter still seemed to echo in the halls. In one room, a small girl had forgotten her drawing. It showed a bright rainbow over a city, with the words, "Dreams come true here," written in wobbly letters. Marcus carefully pinned the drawing back on the wall. Then he walked to his car, passing Sarah and Michael as they locked up for the night. They waved goodbye, and Marcus watched as they walked away hand in hand, their voices mixing with the evening air as they planned tomorrow's classes. Driving home, Marcus didn't feel the old pain anymore when he thought of Sarah. Instead, he felt something new, peace, maybe even joy. He had lost his wife 9 years ago because he couldn't see the beauty in her dreams. But now, at least, he could help those dreams grow bigger than either of them had imagined. In his rearview mirror, the art center's lights slowly dimmed. But Marcus Chen smiled, knowing that tomorrow they would shine again, helping children paint their own visions of success, one colorful dream at a time.